The words did not come with drama, but with a heaviness that was impossible to ignore. Sam Heughan was reflecting on the past when he paused, as if weighing whether honesty was worth the cost. Then he said it quietly, without theatrics, "I should have spoken up years ago." The sentence landed harder than any headline, because regret, once admitted, cannot be reshaped. For most of his career, Sam Heughan has been defined by control. He chose his words carefully, guarded his private life fiercely, and rarely allowed emotion to guide public conversation. That discipline earned respect, but it also built walls that few could see past. When someone like him speaks about regret, it signals that silence has stopped being neutral. Those close to him noticed a change long before the admission became public. His tone in interviews softened, his answers grew more reflective, and his usual deflections felt heavier than before. Questions about the past no longer rolled off him with practiced ease. Instead, they seemed to linger, as if reminding him of moments that could no longer be revisited. What made the statement so powerful was its lack of specificity. Sam did not name names or events, yet the emotion behind his words suggested something deeply personal. Regret implies choice, and choice implies consequence. The implication was clear. There was a time when speaking up might have altered the course of a story that had since hardened into assumption. Industry observers were quick to note how rare this kind of admission is. In entertainment, silence is often praised as professionalism, while explanation is seen as vulnerability. Sam had spent years choosing the former, believing it was the safer path. Admitting regret meant acknowledging that safety came with a cost he had underestimated. The idea that silence can harm rather than protect is uncomfortable, especially for someone whose career thrived on restraint. Sam's words suggested that by not speaking, he may have allowed narratives to form unchecked. Over time, those narratives became louder than truth, shaping perceptions he could no longer influence. Regret, in this context, was not about a single moment, but about years of accumulation. Fans responded with unexpected intensity. Some felt sympathy, recognizing the burden of carrying unspoken truths under constant scrutiny. Others felt unsettled, realizing that what they interpreted as composure might have been endurance. The reaction revealed how deeply audiences project meaning onto silence, often mistaking it for indifference. There was also a sense of mourning woven into the response. Regret implies lost opportunity, and the idea that something meaningful might have been protected or clarified too late struck a chord. Sam's words opened the door to questions no one could answer definitively. What might have changed if he had spoken earlier, and who might have been spared misunderstanding? What stood out most was the sincerity of the moment. There was no attempt to soften the admission or frame it as growth alone. Sam allowed the regret to exist without resolution, acknowledging that some consequences cannot be reversed. That honesty made the statement feel less like a confession and more like an acceptance. By the end of this chapter, the narrative around Sam Heughan had shifted. He was no longer just the figure who remained silent, but someone who recognized the weight of that silence. The admission did not explain the past, but it reframed it, casting years of restraint in a more human light. And in that acknowledgement, regret became not a weakness, but a truth finally allowed to surface. As the admission settled in, it became clear that Sam Heughan's regret was not rooted in impulse, but in long reflection. Saying he should have spoken up years ago suggested an internal reckoning that had been unfolding quietly, far from cameras and commentary. Regret of that kind does not emerge overnight. It builds through moments remembered too late and choices reconsidered long after their consequences are fixed. What surfaced publicly was only the final layer of something deeply personal. Those close to Sam describe a man who had always believed silence was the responsible option. In an industry where personal narratives are often weaponized, withholding information can feel like an act of protection. Yet protection has limits, and over time, it can become a form of self-erasure. His words implied a realization that by staying quiet, he may have allowed others to speak for him in ways that no longer reflected the truth. The phrase, "spoken up," carried particular weight. It suggested there were moments when his voice might have changed how events were understood, when clarification could have softened speculation or corrected misinterpretation. Instead, absence became its own message, and that message took on a life of its own. Silence filled with assumptions is rarely neutral, and Sam's regret seemed to acknowledge that hard lesson. What complicated the situation further was the timing. Speaking now, after years had passed, offered no clean resolution. Whatever he wished he had said earlier could no longer arrive at the moment it was meant to matter most. That gap between intention and opportunity is where regret finds its sharpest edge. Acknowledging it publicly meant accepting that some things cannot be repaired, only recognized. Fans sensed that weight immediately. Many responded not with demands for details, but with empathy for the vulnerability being shown. Regret is universal, even if the circumstances are not, and seeing it expressed so plainly resonated deeply. Others, however, struggled with frustration, wondering why clarity had been withheld for so long. The split reaction underscored how differently people interpret silence when they are not the ones carrying it. Industry voices offered a quieter perspective. In environments built on perception, speaking too soon can be as damaging as speaking too late. Sam's career had benefited from caution, but that caution came at a personal cost that was only now being articulated. His admission suggested a recalibration of values, where emotional honesty had finally outweighed strategic restraint. There was also an undercurrent of accountability in his words. Regret is not just about feeling, it is about recognizing responsibility. By saying he should have spoken up, Sam implicitly acknowledged his role in allowing certain narratives to persist. That recognition did not accuse anyone else, nor did it seek absolution. It simply placed ownership where it belonged. As the conversation evolved, the focus shifted from what Sam had not said to what he was saying now. The lack of elaboration became part of the message, signaling that this was not an attempt to rewrite history, but to make peace with it. Sometimes, acknowledgement is not meant to correct the past, but to release its hold on the present. In that sense, his words functioned less as explanation and more as closure. Observers noted how rare it is for public figures to admit regret without offering redemption. There was no claim that everything worked out, no reassurance that lessons had been neatly learned. Sam allowed the discomfort to remain visible, resisting the urge to frame it as growth alone. That restraint gave the admission credibility, making it feel less like narrative control and more like truth. By the time the reaction began to quiet, a different understanding had taken hold. Sam Heughan had not spoken to ignite speculation, but to acknowledge a cost that had long gone unnamed. His regret did not change the past, but it altered how the past was seen, adding depth to years of silence. In doing so, he reminded everyone that some truths arrive not to fix what was broken, but to finally be recognized as real. Even after the conversation faded from headlines, the weight of that regret continued to resonate. It lingered not as a scandal, but as a quiet reminder of how much remains unspoken in public life. Silence, once chosen, leaves marks that cannot be erased by explanation alone. Acknowledging them is often the only form of honesty left. In the end, Sam Heughan's admission was less about confession and more about acceptance. He did not seek to undo the past or reshape its outcome, only to name what had been carried for too long. That act, simple as it was, shifted the story from speculation to humanity. And sometimes, that shift is the most meaningful closure anyone can offer.